Hello and welcome to the Brazilian B8 guests. If you are watching us right now online, you are probably seeing us on YouTube or on LinkedIn. You can watch this video whenever you want. It's going to be recorded on the Brazilian BA on YouTube. And if you have any problems watching it live, go to YouTube, or if you prefer LinkedIn, whatever you choose the best. Please subscribe to the channel as well, because we're going to have a lot of other conversations about Nimble with different guests in the following weeks. Today, I have a very good couple of friends, or two very good guys called Jon. The first one is Jon Kern from US. Hello, Jon. How are you?
Hello. Good. How are you, Fabrizio? I like the opening. That's pretty fun. I didn't know you were that good of a chalk artist.
I try to use some artificial intelligence tools. I'm not that good guy, but tools are good for us. And the other Jon who is joining us is John Turley from England. Hello, Jon.
Hello. Good afternoon, I suppose, for most people probably. Hi, Fabrizio. Hello, Jon. And thanks for making us look so cool in the chalk drawings.
You guys are cool anyway. Drawings are live now, live. And I thank you very much for joining me. And this starts a series of podcast conversations relating to Nimble. I have been working on this definition with IIBA based on this study created by IBA called Being Nimble, right? The scalable capability for organizations to sense and respond to change. And I'm trying to bring other people to use this word as a conversation because I believe it's very useful. And very succinctly, when I talk about the difference between Agile and Nimble, people can understand this in different ways. I know that even in English, Agile and Nimble, some people see it as the same meaning, but some people use it for different stuff. So I'm using Agile very much as a way of working, methodologies, frameworks, practices, a set of practices for management. And when I talk about Nimble, I'm talking about the ability to sense and respond to change. And sensing and responding quickly and precisely. So something that have to do about your ability to think about what's happening, understand what's going on, and respond in an adequate way, independently of the way of working. So Agile is more focused on methodology, and I could see if the methodology is working on, if the methodology is making me nimble, right? So nimble is the ability, is the result. And the question I brought from today, I get from some of posts I've seen Jon posting on web about reimagine Agile. And my question for you, and I would like Jon to start, Jon Kern, can Agile be reimagined to become Nimble? I think we could start by, what do you mean about reimagine Agile? Why is this a conversation?
Yeah, the way you describe Nimble, especially regarding kind of counter to Agile, is on the one hand appropriate in that most people consider, falsely, I would say, most people think of Agile and they think of the frameworks, the methods, the processes, all the certifications, the credentialing, and that is not, what Agile set out to be. And in so many words, I think it's closer to how you're talking about Nimble, because that it's just reimagining Agile would be trying to help others get to a point of understanding maybe what you have around the document you shared with us about Nimble, and the fact that it's a lot more than, it's not the methods, it's not the ways of working, it's a higher level. And I think that has eluded a lot of people over the decades. Now, some have gotten it, but I think, to your point, the contrast is Agile as a pure method or framework. That's, I think, has hurt the industry when people think that's what it is, and I think it short changes the conversations. So from that perspective, I like how you articulated Nimble.
Okay. John, how do you see the difference between Agile, John Turley, Agile and Nimble? Do you see that there are two different concepts, independently if those are the best words for them?
That's a better question. Do I see two different concepts? And the answer to that is yes, I do. Right? It's a really important differentiation, we think, to differentiate between concepts, which are just words or frameworks, or they might be diagrams or whatever, but they're concepts. They're almost imaginary constructs, human-made imaginary constructs, right? Whereas the actually being nimble or agile or anything else, that's something else, isn't it? That's not a concept. That's something that we feel in our bodies and something that we do. And as John said, largely that difference seems to have got lost somewhere in between, should we say, the publishing of the manifesto and now. Agile has become about something else. It's become sort of turgid and dogmatic in many places. So the concepts, I think, are good ones. I think Nimble does add something to the concept of Agile because it makes explicit things that I feel are implicit in Agile and in the values in the manifestos anyway. But given that we've kind of lost sight of that, which is implicit, making it explicit with a new concept seems like a good idea to me. Yeah.
Nice. And actually, terms are going to become more and more overloaded over time. So I have seen a lot of organizations when I come to let's say a business manager or a business executive and say, "Oh, would you like to be agile?" They say, "Oh, I already invested in agile and it didn't work for me." But he thinks about agile. He invested in agile, like if it was something he could buy from the shelf and put into his organization, and not as something that his organization should achieve as an outcome from what he was buying from consultancy. You cannot buy agility. You can try methods and frameworks and to become more agile, or using a different word, more nimble. So as agile is something that today you can buy, and I mean when I say you can buy certifications, you can buy methodologies. There's a lot of consultancies that are providing agile platforms, frameworks, trainings. So it's something viable. Having another word should be a way to change our way of seeing it. But I even would like to come back to the question: if agile is something related to a set of practices, could we make those practices, or could we reimagine those practices to come back to the basis and becoming nimble as they was conceived from the beginning?
Well, I'm just going to throw away. I'm going to shut up and let John answer that question, and buy him some time to think of an answer, maybe. But I'm not sure myself that agile was intended to be nimble in the outset, right? I don't know if agile was created with complex environments in mind and with the need to sense and respond to the environment. I don't know. So I think you just sort of made an assumption that it was, Fabrizio, and I don't know really that it was. We should ask John. John, was the original idea around agile that you were working with in Snowbird to account for complex environments and a sense and respond style of interaction? We thinking of that at the time?
We know that the manifesto was called the Agile Manifesto for software development, and now we're using some of those ideas for everything, like for business agility. And the question is really good. Was this on the intention from the beginning? When did it change?
That's a good question. I mean, it's essentially a bunch of us were successful software practitioners, develop products. And the way that I like to think of the manifesto gathering was, we all had slightly different lightweight methodologies, and we were successful, and we were trying to combat the heavyweight processes of the day, the ones that had more marketing muscle than a bunch of us small time people. And it ended up being able to sort of distill some common traits of all of our methods into what you see. So simple values. And you can imagine I was doing heavyweight Defense Department contracting, which led me to create lighter weight, more effective, more pragmatic, more cost efficient approach. And so I would say that much of my work, and probably I don't know about the others, but I would guess today you might consider it that we were in a complex environment where things were volatile and uncertain. Especially, I remember sort of the hypocrisy of doing research and development proposals for a really long, like a year out. Like, that sounds like an oxymoron. And wait, so you're going to do research and juke and move around based on your findings? How can you possibly put a year proposal out there? But we did. So I think in hindsight, we probably came from those environments, but I don't know. I certainly would not admit to knowing those words or phrasing it like that, but rather just understanding this is the environment that we're developing software in. And yeah, there's, I guess, sense and responding was going on. And part of the methodology, certainly the one that I grew up and developed back then, because I was working with masters like Peter Code and object oriented. So, I was making my own models, probably, right, to think about ways to respond and sense. But yeah, I'm not going to sit here and be. First off, none of us expected any of this to happen, right? We just published it, and then this happened. It's not like, oh, you wait, I bet this is going to be huge. I bet we're going to be talking about this 20 years from now. It's so awesome. I'm not going to say that any of us had that idea. But yeah, I think we probably were in those environments, but we didn't talk about it like that. We probably were sensing and responding, because you see some of the principles and some of the values talk about, responding to change, so.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there are two, aren't there, that I think really have sensing and responding complexity very deeply implicit in them. If we're talking about complexity in almost any context at all, quite quickly what we start to talk about is the interactions rather than the objects themselves in the system, right? And there it is, people and interactions over processes and tools. Now, that right there is a recognition that it's the interactions that are the important thing, right? Now that implies that there's a recognition that it's a complex system, but it doesn't say it explicitly, right? And responding to change recognizes that it's a volatile, unpredictable environment that you're likely to be working in. But again, it doesn't say it implicitly, which is why sort of a few minutes ago I said, I think Nimble is implicit in Agile, but only in Agile, if you think about it in the way that John and I are talking about it. Mm-hmm. If you think about Agile being the way, let's say, most people think about it, I don't know if that's true, but the way you articulated it as frameworks and methodologies, that is missing. If you talk about frameworks, you can't be interested in people and interactions over processes and tools if you're a process. Do you know what I mean? You've got to be a process first, right? So I think, that's
Yeah. One thing that I thought very interesting when John mentioned that they united together to discuss how to develop software at that point. You said we all had our methods, each one of us had a different method, a lightweight method, differently from the heavy methods that we have been working with before that day, or that was used to be the traditional way of developing software. And maybe that's why we usually think about Agile as a method stuff, because it was born from methods. It was the idea of trying to change the method of working for software development. And you probably, as John said, implicitly find out something higher. If you want to make better methods, we must think in higher concepts, in elevate our conversation, not for the way of working, but what we should achieve with that. Maybe it was not very well seen, or maybe it was merged between methods. If you look for the practice, you may see practice of how we do things and what we should achieve as a result. And I would say Nimble is probably one of the results that you achieve using Agile, or that you should achieve. Being able to sense and respond, like, oh, there's and that extrapolates very much the software development niche or area. If we say, oh, there's a pandemic coming over and my business have to survive, how can I survive? I must understand very quickly what's going on, and I have to change people, where people work, the kind of software they use, where do we go from one place to another. We have to change everything very quickly. This ability of sensing and responding quickly is what we're calling Nimble, and there are some methods that could help me to do that. And what should we change, or what should we reimagine when we are talking about Agile? What didn't work and what's working? What should be changing? Let's try to do an analysis about how Agile is going on right now.
Yeah, my best guess, kind of and hypothesis, is for decades, even pre-manifesto, a phrase I would often use is people, process, and tools. It's kind of how we get things done. A group of people with a goal and a direction of travel, whatever you want to call it, some destination, some idea, shared ideas of where we're headed. And this is something Turley and I work on a lot right now, is I was speaking at a regional Scrum gathering in Belgrade and kind of challenging him a little bit. It's not like we were waiting until some published methodology came around to produce things, right? People for a long time have been able to produce value. And then when it's becomes somewhat pattern oriented, they might write it down, right? We might create a process. And we might even create tools to help automate things that are mundane and tedious, and that we can automate. So I kind of almost want to remind folks that you don't need to read something out of a book to succeed. You just need to kind of have a brain, use a good environment in which you can create and work, probably in a nimble fashion, in an agile fashion. So that I think the thing that I want to reimagine is to help figure out what conditions need to exist and how can we help an organization create those conditions under which being nimble or agile, having agility, can flourish. I think that's what's missing, is we've taken that people, process, and tools and somehow focused on the process bit a little too much, swung the pendulum. Like I would say this, and just I think even before I went over to Belgrade in November, I was saying something to John about, I'm a process nut. And he goes, no, yeah, I really think you're more of a value nut if you really get right down to it. I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. Like, yeah. So, because I would often say, Agile isn't, I'm not trying to bash certain methodologies or anything like that, but the point is, don't elevate those above the individuals and interactions and collaborating, because that's what's happening. We're elevating those as if as if we do the process and we install a process, suddenly we're going to get what we want. I actually saw an organization slide talking about their success with SAFe, and they couched it in terms of how many PIs they've done. I'm like, well, that's just process. That doesn't, did you deliver more value? You know, so I think reimagining it is helping get a wide group of folks together to do what we did in Snowbird about software development practices, but do it about organizational. What do we need to help, and what do we need to highlight to help other folks be able to truly unlock nimbleness or agility? So that's kind of what I see it is. We need to put the people back on top, put process where it belongs.
And it's interesting because when you say that someone is buying Agile, usually what they're buying is a tool, and this tool comes with a set of best practices. Let's use quotes on that, right? But you have to adapt your process to the tool ways of operating, and so you go to hire some people who knows how to use that tools and that process. You're just doing the opposite of the way you were describing. That's having very smart people who can understand what's going on and what worked in the past, what did not work, and let's emerge our methodology from the good practice, the things that work. It. So if that works, let's use it.
I'm not even sure you need very good people, as you said. Everybody's got a brain, right? Everybody comes to work committed to doing the best job that they can do, creating value for the customers and themselves. And sometimes that gets squashed by the organizational life that we have to endure, you know. But if we could just, in the reimagining Agile, what I think John just said is reimagine Agile as that first value. People and interactions over processes and tools, because what we've done for one reason and another is we flipped it, and we're saying into people and interactions over processes and tools, whilst acting processes and tools over people and interactions. That's the reimagining that we could do, and that to put people back at the heart of software development or really any other aspect of work.
And keeping on you, Turley, how can we do that? How can we bring people back to the top of this this way of thinking? How can we bring people to think organizations to become nimble?
Well, I think one thing to recognize is that in some organizations that is happening. In some organizations, people are coming before processes and tools. In some parts of our organizations, we're living that. So what John and I want to do with the John and Jim and Heidi's and Sanjeev's Reimagining Agile initiative is find out what are those conditions where it's really working, where the people really are first. What's happening there that meant that could happen that isn't happening elsewhere? And that's really, really, really important, because neither John nor I want to sit here and pretend that we have the answers, pretend we know what needs to be done to make Agile work, because we don't. What we do know is that in some scenarios, Agile does work. It does bring the promises that it should do. In most, I think most, it does not. So what's the difference between the two? Okay. And that's really key for us, I think. My guess would be that one of the differences that we'll find is that we've talked a bit about uncertainty already and complexity. So ambiguity, volatility, uncertainty, and so on. As that increases, that can create a real problem for the human nervous system, for our autonomic nervous system, for all of us. As uncertainty increases, if we work in an environment where we're told that we're supposed to have the answers, and woe betide anybody that doesn't have the answers, which most of us are, right? I spent years working in banks and insurance companies, not having the answers. When you work in those environments, that gets you in a lot of trouble. So you really have to pretend you've got the answers even when you don't. So as uncertainty increases, it becomes harder to have the answers. The autonomic, we could say automatic response in our nervous system is one of panic. This is a very dangerous situation for us because we're likely to get in trouble. So what we have two choices. One is that we can either learn to sit with that discomfort, with the support of our colleagues and our bosses, and go, my nervous system's panicking. I just need to work my way through this. That's an interaction first approach, by the way. That's putting people in interactions over process and tools. That's one approach. Or we can double down on the ways in which we already know the world. We can say, with all this uncertainty, what we need is more process, more control. And that's what we tend to do. So reimagining Agile for me would be recognizing that as uncertainty increases, this creates problems for us on a human level. But don't have a knee-jerk reaction of trying to get more process and more control. Just sit with that discomfort a little bit. Learn what it has to teach you and learn how to operate in uncertainty rather than try and drive all the uncertainty out. There we go. So there's two things.
I want to try to make a metaphor from what you said, and let's see if I can do it.
Yeah, good. Metaphors are good.
Yeah. So the world is complex, and that's a thing. That's a fact. And it's becoming more and more complex because the number of connections are greater every day, and we have to deal with it. It's not an option to leave.
Yeah, it's not woo-woo. It's not something that might happen or something left field. That's measurably happening, yes.
But the way we deal with complexity and the way we deal with uncertainty must change. So in a simple word, I could deal with complexity, trying to make it become simpler. And as you said, creating a process. So let's create a process, structured way of processing. And my metaphor is with music. In a simple word, you would put everything on a script, and so you would know every note that you have to play a music. And we need to become jazz players. So a jazz player does not have a specific script, but he's not open wide playing anything. No. He have a structure. He knows how to put the notes into the music, improvising. So he doesn't know what's coming next because he doesn't know what the other players in the band are going to play, but he is adapted or he's skilled to deal with that. So when you talk about bringing people to the top, or when Jon Kern's talking about putting people in the top, maybe we should be developing the right skills for people to deal with this complexity, to deal with this improvisation, probably not the best word, but the way of sensing and responding to change.
Yeah, like a jazz musician does. And it's a great metaphor. It's a beautiful metaphor. And what it conjures to my mind is those times when one of the musicians will be on a little bit of a solo and they'll go so far off the melody that you can see the band sitting there looking at each other going, I don't know, like a bit like that. You know what I mean? And they're kind of doing their thing and they're going, oh my God, is he ever going to be able to bring this back? Is she ever going to be able to bring this back? Right. Yeah. And then and the whole audience is thinking that. And then all of a sudden, the musician just comes straight back in on the melody and the whole band goes, oh yeah, we get it. And they're off again, and everybody cheers. That's how we need to be operating. Yes, in a complex world, that's being nimble. In your language, that's being nimble, right? Yeah. Beautiful metaphor.
Okay. Want to add something over that, Jon Kern?
Yeah, I think just to sort of reemphasize the picking up on that metaphor, when we talk about the folks getting together to do the work, to head towards some value production that they're doing, in that moment, I often will say that even if we don't have all the steps and we don't know exactly what the next step is, I'll often say, well, we can at least take a next step. I mean, not one over a cliff, an obvious cliff, but take a step, because we'll feel, it sounds goofy, but if we're heading in the right direction or not. And I think that's what's going on with when I remember seeing Igor Boutman, and we were in St. Petersburg, Russia, and so I was like this close to the stage, and I remember watching him do exactly what John said, and I went up and talked to him a little later, because one of the guys, he played sax with Bill Clinton, and one of the guys was an American. So I had conversations. I was curious, how does this work? Because I'm like, of course you don't have it, to your point, Fabricio, of course you don't have this written down in the notes. And they go, no. And I think I was just talking with just before this meeting, this podcast with Daniel Markham. We do this thing called the Nerd Roundup, and we were talking about when you have kind of that shared vision, or at least a vision, or some sort of model, some kind of a domain. So that's what the musicians have, and that's what, if you let them, a team trying to achieve this, they'll form that kind of a picture. And yeah, if someone kind of wanders a little far, you'll probably know it. You might know it, and if you don't, others around you will, if you let them. But no, we have to treat everything as absolute, because 1 + 1 is always 2. We're taught that since grade school, right? That's what happens. No, we can't live with this uncomfortable unknowing. So we're going to pretend like we know, and we're going to just do more breaking it down, more estimation, more, frankly, stuff that probably doesn't have a return on investment. But instead, we need to be more like the jazz group and have a much freer environment to build that sense that we all have. And that's I've been in some of those. I'm not saying they happen a lot. All right, it's wonderful to work on in a team like that a few times in your career, to get the real kick-ass, high-performing team where that jazz improvisation can happen, and you deliver value, and you make lots of people happy. That can happen.
You mentioned something that I think important. That's a higher level view of this team, that you call it probably value, or an outcome, or a goal. And there's a comment here from Nuno. I know Nuno, he's from Portugal, and he say focus on delivered XPIs, or X stories, or X story points is what product community calls the future factory. And maybe in some ways, the agile methods becomes a way of delivering features and not delivering value. And there's a difference between that. Could you work on that, or elaborate that, or help me on elaborating that?
Sure. I grew up with feature-driven development, so to speak, working with Peter Code. Now, we defined a feature. So this was kind of key. A feature is defined as a client-valued, there's that word value, piece of functionality. So it took me a while to learn that not everybody else thinks like that. and so I used to say, kind of assuming, because doesn't everybody work like I work? Doesn't everybody always know that the features on the stack are already values, like that by definition? So I learned that you have to be way more explicit about it. And when John Turley and I work with teams, and we do something called like an Agile mentoring workshop sometimes with teams, and our first exercise is literally, what's your purpose here? What do you understand value? Do you know what your team's trying? It sounds a little bit like the Office Space movie with the Bob and Bob efficiency consultants. Like, so what is it that you do here? But you'd be surprised that not all teams truly understand what we're here to make money. Come on, that's a we would call that maybe a glib answer. It might be true, but yeah, I think it's so important. The reason that I think the value is so important, and that vision, is that all the musicians, or all of the team. I want to, as Turley was pointing out, I want everybody's brain involved. And if you're just order takers, and if you broke everything down and thinking it's like a factor, I hate that term, because we're not building 10 bricks. No, each thing's different, right? We're not. But the idea of sharing the what value means, and this is from the high level view of the whole product down to major features to it's a recursive thought. I want everyone to understand what we're trying to achieve. What does value look like, so that they can exercise in a micro judgments along the way to try to do the least amount of work to generate the most value. And you can't do that if you don't know if I step in this direction, is it better? Or if I go in that direction, is it worse? If you can't make that judgment, then all you're left with doing is, well, I guess I'll just design all of the UX right now, or I'll just write this giant thing for a feature. So that's how much I think value is crucial to allowing you to kind of exercise that improvisation that
Right.
that you mentioned in the jazz. They know if they're straying too far off of being valuable, they'll get it from the audience, they'll get it from, like John was saying, the other band members might be going, yo, dude, come on back.
I'm trying to follow your lead, and if we are changing organization starting from people, and we want people to be skilled, to be nimble, to become nimble, probably the skills they need is not obviously just playing, but the skill they need to become nimble is very much related to analysis, to the ability to understand what's going on, to synthesize the complexity of the world, and maybe in some way put those implicit things explicit, like explain what's going on, what do we want to achieve, what are our goals, what is avoiding us to achieve our goals, what are the possible options we have in front of us to go forward and take the best course of action. So this kind of ability, and I don't have IIBA in the top of my screen by accident, and so business analysis is what's behind this study that I showed you about being nimble, because there is a belief behind it that if people can think as business analysts, if they can understand and articulate change very well, organizations can become nimbler, faster, or easier. Does that make sense for you, John?
So I will take advantage of not knowing which John you were referring to there.
That's my tip. I can always do that.
There was a strategy. So you use the word analysis, right? Analysis is important, but you used another word too, which I don't think we hear enough, which was synthesis, right? Analysis works really well in some circumstances, but in others, it doesn't. We need to understand value that we're trying to create sometimes through a process of synthesis. By looking at, not breaking down the value into its component parts, which is obviously a reductionist approach, that's analysis, as you know, but by taking that value and sort of not breaking it down, but lifting it up into the wider context that it works in, and goes, well, what value does that make if we put it into that system? If we go and talk, I don't know, let's go and talk to our customers about how they use it. That's synthesis. Right, and that's critically important, and I think not said often enough for Ritzio. So I wanted to grab that word, because when we've got analysis and synthesis, then we have the prospect of having a shared understanding of value, or even a shared vision of what value might look like, that can be fairly vague. And that's really important. I think for a lot of people, that sounds like a paradox. Or how can you have a good understanding of value if you've only got a vague understanding of value? And details and a good understanding are not the same thing. So by using synthesis, we can hold on to a fairly vague understanding of value, which at the end of the day, the value might be a long way away. We can't have a detailed understanding. And that's the little trip that people make often, that I was talking about before, when they go, well, we need a better understanding of the value. And if all you've got is analysis in your arsenal, then what you'll do is add detail to that value proposition or whatever it is. And that's kind of a trap. That's a process methodology trap. We've got to learn to work not just with uncertainty, but with ambiguity. And synthesis is very helpful for doing that.
I like it very much, that idea. And using another metaphor, but maybe not even a metaphor, just an example. we are living now a very huge change in organizations, which is AI coming to our hands and available for everyone to use. And if we don't have a goal or a vision where to go, if we cannot synthesize everything that's happening, because there's so much you can be analyzing and decomposing, how many tools that are available in your organization. If you cannot synthesize what's going on and have a vision for how to deal with it, maybe you will feel lost and have no direction.
Yeah, overwhelmed is what you feel.
Overwhelmed.
So I will see your metaphor and raise it or something like that. Sometimes I talk to people about aliens coming to Earth and trying to understand what a car is, and they could take the approach of analysis. They could find a car, they could take it to bits, which would take a long time, and they'd learn a lot about the car, right? What it's made of, what the materials were. A really clever alien might notice that, oh, there's a seat. A human being could sit comfortably in there, maybe, and wheels, maybe like the seat, maybe it rolls, right? This would take a very long time. You'd learn a lot, but you wouldn't learn nearly as much as you learned about car if you took an approach of synthesis, which would be to walk out to a road and see where the cars were being used. And then immediately you'd see that there was a form of transportation, right? So there's another metaphor to illustrate the difference between the two. And it really sets you on a different track, I think, if you're synthesizing meaning rather than analyzing, because as you said, you can analyze stuff forever, can't you? And if you think that's the route to understanding, you will keep analyzing forever. And then we get this phrase, analysis paralysis, right? People or teams unable to operate in high degrees of uncertainty without perfect knowledge, which you can't have. What do you do then?
Yeah, so you're asking about, what can we do to help? It really comes down to helping individuals, and that aggregates to the teams and the organizations, because it's a very personal journey to be able to, in some sense, combat these very natural feelings of discomfort. And, that leads to, I think, a lot of the behavior that we see that might not be so agile after all, and might not, it's the kind of thing that the closer you are to producing 100 bricks that are all the same, okay, a lot of things that we've been talking about don't apply. But as you move up the chain of let's say, uncertainty, complexity, and things like that, this matters so much more. It has I would say it has an outsized leverage if you can help. And this is what part of the reimagining Agile, this is part of the journey that John and I have been on, is how can we help give people some simple tools or methods or tips or tricks, or we often call it, think of it like a field guide to, I don't know, starting a fire. So, some kind of simple thing doesn't require all kinds of theory, a place to get started that we can begin to help create the conditions in which we can be more nimble or agile. And I think one of the superpowers that I have, maybe it's not so super, maybe more people can learn it, is kind of my hope, is to be able to stay uncomfortable with not knowing, and there's that, like, that, I think the jazz thing is good. They kind of know what the riff is, and they know generally where they're going, and that's enough, because we're not going to make drastic mistakes. We're not, we're going to just be confident, like trust in yourselves. And I think, how do you help people build that kind of, I guess it's a skill, I don't know, but it's an ability to be comfortable with being uncomfortable slightly. So yeah, how do we do that? That's something that we hope to be working on this year. We have some answers here and there. Yeah.
And probably people can be trained to do that. I know, like, people who does acting in improvisation shows, they train very much to improvise. So they are really improvising when they are on stage, creating those scenes that are very funny and very clever. And it's like, how can they think that so fastly? Because they train it very much to deal with that or to play that game, right? So maybe we have to train people to be able to think, understand, and react, to be nimble.
I think there's a danger there in thinking that training is the way. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm right, okay, but training has connotations for me. In our work together, John and my work together, one of the things we like to get people to do at certain times is just slow down. Just slow down the rate of conversation, the rate at which you're talking. Now, that doesn't take any training, doesn't take any theory, but I'll tell you what happens when people slow down their words. They breathe differently. When people breathe differently, their autonomic nervous system becomes safer when they're breathing more deeply. When their autonomic nervous system stays safer, they can access the prefrontal cortex to think more clearly, and they can give and receive to their colleagues and from their colleagues cues of social safety. Then you can start to collaborate. So there's an example of one tiny little tip that's in our field guide that we're constructing. It's just a tip, just slow down, pay attention. And some teams do it and some teams hate it. Some teams will not slow down. It's like, I don't know what they think it is that we've said to insult them, but it's like, no, give me the answers and give me them quick. What do you think we're paying you for?
Yeah.
They really do. So it's a very powerful thing just to slow down and breathe. So there's a tip. Requires no training, but very powerful.
There's a question here. I'll put the question on screen soon, but just to connect that point you brought, John, maybe it's not just training. To be able to breathe and wait, probably you have to meditate, but that connects to the way your brain works, and that connects to a word I like to use. Some people don't, but it's mindset. So there is a specific mindset that help us to be nimble, and this specific mindset is connected to thinking, to be able to express, talk, understand, to an holistic view of things, to see the whole and not just my small pieces, to be motivated by the outcome and not the output. So I'm not worried about delivering the next feature that's on my backlog, but on delivering the value that this organization is searching for. And if I'm connected to that value, I can even change and reprioritize my backlog or see different ways of doing that. I don't even need a backlog for that. So
you've hit a nail on the head there. What really what we could say that what you're talking about there is increasing the complexity of mindset, right? This is language from the field of constructivist developmental theory or adult developmental theory. Sometimes it's called vertical development, vertical learning. But being able to see the whole as well as the parts requires you to have a greater level of psychological complexity, which takes time to develop, right? Because there are more things when you're looking at the whole and the parts, you can see, right, that that's more complex than just looking at some of the parts. Mm-hmm. So developing a more complex mindset to get closer to matching the complexity of the environment. That's one of the things that we're seeking to do in our world. At the moment, the problem that we've got is not that the world or the world of work, our work, software development is becoming too complex. No, this is an incomplete statement. It's becoming too complex for the complexity of our mindset. Our way of making our meaning in the world is being outstripped by the complexity of the environment. We can't put the complexity of the environment genie back in the bottle. But what we can do is work on the development of more complex ways of viewing the world, more complex mindsets to match the complexity in the environment. And then we can see the whole and the parts. We can hold on to the vision or the value, and we can do our tasks simultaneously, and all the things that you said much more eloquently than I was about to. So I'll stop.
Love that. Want to add something, John?
Yeah, I mean, I noticed a comment from Giuseppe about, video game industry, similar analogy to, like the jazz, so to speak. I always dreamed about, creating video games, never did. They seem incredibly challenging, especially knowing how huge the teams are. But I think what's often overlooked in places that aren't doing so well is having that. I think, and mindset's a good term. I think a lot of people think of it as probably what we hope people think of it as, which is a silly thing to say, but it's maybe a combination of the ways we make our meaning, our philosophy, our kind of our how we sense and respond, all of that. It's not a set up process, right? It's not a recipe. It's not something concrete. And I think for me, it's that constant repetition of reminding us where we're going. And I think even in jazz, they might have a couple of solos in the same general song, let's say, right? But even there's still a general direction of travel. There's and I don't need all the details. And I don't know if video games are like the mini game for each release that Giuseppe's talking about, but like that's part of the secret to success, I think, is constant repetition of something that helps people, remind people of where you're going. And I think what happens is people assume, well, I said it once. Oh, maybe I need to resend that email. Well, okay. Or maybe I need to write more in the Jira issue. Okay, maybe, but probably not. And it's all those little, I think false things that we tell ourselves that we think we're communicating, but we're not. And instead, people need to be, I'll use the analogy on the shop floor, right? Designers need to work with actual coders. A lot of times I'll see UX designs. I'm like, dude, do you know if that's even possible? And I'll, go ask somebody who actually codes in their system. Do you know if that's possible? A lot of times things are crazily separated because we still try to treat the system as if it's some sort of manufacturing process, and we still try to we flip into what Turley and I might call the unit-wise approach and throwing away that, the holistic view, because on the surface, it looks simpler if we break things down, but then you lose all the magic. Then you lose all the improvisation. You fall into what we call a trap, so to speak, of thinking that you can break down something that complex and then deliver it. No, anyway, I'm starting to say the same thing.
Interesting. Hard thing to change, because we're so used to break organizations into smaller units as a way of dealing with the complexity of a big organization. But you're right, we lose the connections when we do that, and we lose the seeing the whole, as John Turley was saying.
And I'll say that the evidence that I often see is folks that have kind of turned into these compartmentalized chunks of work along their value stream, so to speak, doing far too much work, far too in advance of the need, and then they kind of get somehow locked into this. So there's too much UX, there's too much architecture, there's too much coding, right? Because nobody has enough of the picture to know when to stop going off on that riff, and they don't have enough collaboration to say, what, I don't need that much document. Why did you give me that UX design for something so trivial I could do in my sleep? Well, because that's part of the process, right? I mean, that's where the people get thrown to the bottom, so to speak, and the process comes back to the top. And we're just doing the process without really thinking about the direction or as much as we should. And that's the hard thing too. I don't, I'm not saying there's any magic way to get out of that other than to start to recognize that we need to think about doing less rather than more.
I would say pay attention to how deeply uncomfortable it is to do less rather than more when there's a high degree of uncertainty. For a designer to hand over a small, brief design when normally big designs are handed over, that's a really courageous thing to do, and it's very uncomfortable. But we need to be courageous in order to reimagining Agile is going to be, or is, a courageous undertaking, right? If we could reimagine it to be the same thing as it currently is, that doesn't take much courage, but that isn't going to get us very far, right? To reimagine Agile and our ways of working is going to take a great deal of courage. So we should recognize that, I think, and how challenging it is to do less work when more is normally thought of as better. We're really going against the values that are baked into the system when we're doing that, aren't we? We're revolutionaries, which, by the way, the gentlemen that signed the manifesto were viewed as being when they wrote it. Jim Highsmith posted a cover of Software Developer magazine or something like that. And it referred to 17 anarchists. I think that's what it said, but it might have been revolutionaries,
Right. Yeah, it's a good point.
We need a bit of revolutionary zeal.
Right. Yeah, well, Thomas Jefferson, or one of those founders, said you need like a revolution every so often, like every 150 years. So maybe the manifesto needs a revolution every so often to get us back to those foundational principles that I submit are still true today. Like you tell me what values aren't true today. So therefore, upset the giant bureaucracy. So that's the kind of revolution, is to knock over the bureaucracy and let's set people up for success by putting people first.
And joy. Let's set them up for joy. So many people are miserable in their work. Do you know what I mean? Really? Is this the best we can do, So let's get back to having some fun and enjoying ourselves in our work. I think that's part of the revolutionary spirit.
I'm going to try to summarize my key takeaways from this chat today, because it was really good. But John Turley said that summarization is important. So synthesis. So let's try to do some synthesis. So when we are trying to reimagine Agile to become Nimble, we should change the focus that today is very much on tools and process and bring people to the top. So this should be on the top. We should develop people and develop the way people think and understand the organization. They should be able to be revolutionary. So they should change the organization. They should be focused on changing to bring better outcomes. To that, they must be able to feel comfortable with the complexity, with the uncertainty, because that's the way we are dealing and we have to live today. And they must be able not just to analyze stuff, but also to synthesize and so they can focus on the outcomes, not just on the small deliveries, on the outputs. So they can focus on what the organization really needs, and they can change the organization. They can sense and respond to change very quickly and precisely. That's what we are calling Nimble. And there's a lot of courage to do that.
Good summary.
He was definitely listening.
Good thing you recorded this. Yeah. I'll watch it later and write that down. Yeah.
I was using ChatGPT here, so just kidding.
Right, the audio version.
Right. So, guys, thank you very much for joining me today. I'm going to end this session right now. I think we had a very great session. This is going to be recorded. It's available on YouTube, on the Brazilian BA channel, or on LinkedIn. For those who find me on LinkedIn or are looking for you, they will probably find this chat.
Sure.
And even if you were not able to join us live and you want to put some comments on the video, please put on the comments there and we can still go to talk about this. Next week, I'm going to have Mr. Ryland Layton with me talking about another perspective on Nimble, and I hope it's going to be as fun as it was today. And I'm going to end the conversation, and I ask you guys to stay a little more so we can say goodbye after the closing of this presentation, okay?
Yeah, thank you, Fabrizio, and to everybody that's watching, thank you. Thank you for the comments.
Yes, thanks, Fabrizio.
You are most welcome. Thank you
Thanks,
guys for
Scott.
watching. See you guys next week.